So this morning I want to talk about the parable of the arrow, and this comes from Pali Canon, one of the suttas, actually the Kula Malanuka Sutta, and I think it's just really a profound teaching on practical wisdom, and it's one of my favorite suttas because it supports and sort of reinforces my commitment to what I call practical dharma, and that's because it focuses on immediate action in addressing the realities of life rather than getting all snared and entangled in speculative or metaphysical questions. Because as a secular practical Buddhist, I'm not really so concerned with those aspects of Buddhism, the supernatural, the metaphysical. You know, if that's part of your path, that's fine. It's just not part of what I put much emphasis on. And I love this parable, which I will share with you in a minute, because it's a reminder for us to focus on what I think truly matters, and that is the alleviation, or at least the reduction of suffering and the cultivation of greater peace in our lives in the here and now. And as we examine this teaching, we really begin to see its relevance for modern life and its application to our daily challenges. And the story begins, the parable goes like this. A monk comes to one of the members of the Buddhist Sangha, comes to him and approaches him with a series of questions, of unanswered metaphysical questions. He asks about topics such as whether the universe is eternal or not, whether the soul and body are the same or different, what is the nature of afterlife. He goes through a whole litany of questions to the Buddha. And the monk becomes very frustrated when the Buddha declines to answer. He doesn't address these issues, and yet the monk continues to demand answers. And the monk goes so far as to say that he's going to abandon this path if the Buddha doesn't answer his questions. And in response, the Buddha shares with him the parable of the poisoned arrow. And he says that if a man were struck by a poisoned arrow, he wouldn't waste time asking unnecessary questions about the origin of the arrow. Questions as who shot it, what kind of wood it was made from, what kind of feathers were used in making it. Instead, the man would focus on removing the arrow and treating the wound. His life depended on that immediate action. Now here, obviously, the arrow is the suffering, and the Buddha teaches that the questions about the ultimate nature of the universe or metaphysical speculations are really distractions that do not lead to the reduction of suffering. Excuse me. What truly matters, he says in this parable, is understanding and practicing the path that leads to greater peace, that leads to a reduction in suffering. So the parable of the arrow carries immense practical significance and even perhaps more so now than in the Buddha's time, for navigating the complexities of this modern life, this complicated modern life. It offers guidance on how to prioritize what is essential, and it suggests that we avoid becoming consumed by distractions that while they may be intellectually interesting, they don't necessarily contribute to our well-being or our inner peace. So from that, we can sort of make some inferences or some assumptions. The first is what we really need to focus on is addressing the cause of our suffering. As I said a few moments ago, the poisoned arrow represents the suffering that is inherent in all human life, whether it's from physical pain, from loss, from emotional turmoil, from existential anxiety. I mean, the list goes on and on. And in Buddhism, this suffering is understood as a fundamental aspect of our existence. It's caused by craving. It's caused by attachment. It's caused by ignorance. It's caused by a denial of impermanence. And here the Buddhist teaching could not be more clear. He says, instead of losing ourselves in speculation about why we suffer or the ultimate meaning of life or whatever, we should focus on the steps that we need to take to liberate ourselves from suffering or to reduce our suffering. The Noble Eightfold Path, remember, this is the roadmap that he offers us. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Those 8 steps, that roadmap provides a clear and actionable framework for reducing our suffering. So in daily life, this teaching, this parable encourages us to look directly at the challenges we face and take constructive steps to address them. For example, let's say we're dealing with an uptick or an upsurge in anxiety. So we can sit around and ponder the origins of it. We can blame external circumstances, or we can turn to our mindfulness practice. We can cultivate compassion for ourselves. We can lean into it. We can investigate the patterns of thought that perpetuate it. But we need to address it head on. We don't need to speculate about lots of extraneous kinds of aspects of this experience of anxiety. This proactive approach mirrors the urgency of removing the poisoned arrow. It is tantamount to removing the poisoned arrow. So that's the first step that we would take away from this parable. The second is letting go of unnecessary speculation. Letting go of unnecessary speculation. Our modern life, just think about Google, offers endless opportunities for distraction. Much like the monks in the parable's preoccupation with metaphysical questions. Okay, we can get bogged down in debates, theories, all the what ifs this, what if that, all the scenarios, but they, at the end of the day, have very little bearing on our actual experience. They are distractions, I would suggest to you. Whether it's endless scrolling through social media, whether it's obsessing over unanswerable and unknown questions about the future, whether it's becoming entangled in interesting but kind of irrelevant philosophical debates, these activities just get in the way of addressing the issues that truly matter in our lives, the issues that really are where the rubber meets the road. And the Buddha reminds us to let go of these distractions, to focus on what is immediately relevant in our lives and immediately relevant to our well-being. Now, this doesn't mean we suppress curiosity or we avoid intellectual inquiry. Of course not. But it does suggest that we recognize when our questions and our pursuits are not productive. It doesn't mean we don't do it. It's just that we don't mistake it for actually walking the path. For instance, rather than endlessly speculating about what might happen in the future, what if this, what if that? What if instead we focus on cultivating mindfulness and equanimity so that we meet whatever arises with grace and clarity? You know, I talked at the outset before we began about my friends in Jamaica, and that is exactly what they do. They are in the moment. They respond with equanimity. They're not concerned about the weather patterns that brought the hurricane or whatever. They have to meet life head on with whatever it hands them. It is incredibly inspiring. So the third step in terms of what we take away from this parable is we take responsibility for our own freedom. We don't outsource it. The parable underscores the importance of removing our own poisoned arrows, the importance of personal responsibility. No one else can remove that arrow for the wounded man. No one else can walk the path to freedom for us, okay? Teachers, mentors, loved ones, of course they offer guidance and support. Of course they help show us the way. But ultimately, each of us has to take responsibility for our thoughts, our actions, and our decisions. No one can walk this path for us. We come together as a community to support each other, but each of us has to take those steps. And the teaching today highlights the necessity of self-discipline and self-awareness in the journey toward inner peace. You've heard me say again and again that a certain amount of self-awareness is critical on this path, because if we're not aware of where we get tripped up, if we're not aware of where we cause our own suffering, we're pretty helpless to do much about it. So in practical terms, it means recognizing that while, yes, external circumstances influence our lives, it is our responses to these circumstances that we have control over. We don't control what comes, hits us in the face every day. What we have some agency with is how we respond. By cultivating mindfulness, by cultivating skillful action, we transform even the most challenging situations into opportunities for growth and learning. Doesn't mean we like it, doesn't mean we welcome it, but we see these moments as teachers. And again, as I said, the parable of the poisoned arrow is as relevant today, if not more so, than it was 2,400 years ago. In this age of information overload, it is so easy to become paralyzed by the sheer volume of questions, opinions, and uncertainties that confront us. We can just drown in it. But the parable reminds us to pare down our concerns, to tune some of the noise out, and focus on what truly matters, okay, what truly is essential. How can we live with less suffering and more compassion, more wisdom, and more contentment? Bottom line. In the face of global challenges such as climate change, political instability, economic uncertainty, it's too easy to get overwhelmed if we take all that on. So the parable reminds us to focus on what we can do in the present moment in terms of how we respond to all that, rather than be consumed by despair, nihilism, or endless theorizing. Okay? That's a rabbit hole we just do not want to go down. Small, meaningful actions matter, yes. Reducing waste, voting thoughtfully, supporting our communities, what we can do. But if we get bogged down in all the things that we have no control over, it's just more suffering. The small, meaningful actions are like removing the arrow one step at a time. So embedded in the parable is a call to simplify our personal lives. Tune that stuff out, is not because we don't care, but because it's just too much. So rather than obsessing over trying to achieve some degree of perfection or chasing unattainable ideals, we focus on the practical steps that bring us closer to some inner peace. And boy, do we need it in this day and age. And this might involve, as we talk about here, we set aside time for our meditation. We set aside time to cultivate gratitude. We make sure we practice kindness in our interactions with others, because the parable of the arrow is a timeless reminder of the Buddha's pragmatic approach to the human condition. I love that. It's a pragmatic approach to our experience of being human. Its message is simple yet profound. It focuses on addressing the immediate causes of suffering right in front of us and letting go of the distractions that don't have anything to do with reducing our suffering. When we apply these teachings in our daily lives, we can cultivate greater clarity, greater purpose, and greater peace. In the end, Buddha's wisdom encourages us to live fully in the present moment, to act with compassion and mindfulness, and most perhaps importantly, to take responsibility for our own path. Yes, the arrow of suffering will pierce all of us. But remember, the Buddha gave us tools to remove the arrow. Those tools are within our grasp. They are available to us if we are only willing to use them. So those are thoughts today on the parable of the poisoned arrow. So let's